All right, so I guess we'll yeah, thanks again for being here, and I guess we'll jump right in. Paul, do you want to kick us off on some
Yeah.
estate planning basics here? Get into the documents.
Yeah, that's so good. No, I mean, Travis, moving from one to three, that's a big step. That's awesome. That's
Huge,
awesome.
man.
Hey, girl dad too. That's
For
awesome.
sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, but yeah, thanks again. And super excited to have my friend Travis here and just share his knowledge. And yeah, so really, we're gonna just jump into some basics. So Travis, just thinking about like those common estate planning documents, um, why don't you just kind of we'll dig into like a will, what that looks like, and maybe if you could share some like thoughts on who might need it, what it might look like. And again, we're going to differentiate between all these other things like a trust, advanced healthcare directives, and power of attorneys, and all those things that'll be talked about. But let's just kick it off with a will, right? I think that's a good place to start.
Sure. Yeah. So, one of the first things people commonly associate with an estate plan is a will. And so the question becomes, what is a will? What does it do? What can it do for me? And so basically, a will is basically a document that sets forth who's going to administer your estate when you pass and how you want your estate to be divided and, who gets what and how much. And that's a document that gets submitted to the court to appoint one who's going to be your personal representative of your estate, who will handle all of your affairs. And that's an important decision to make in terms of who is going to be that person, that key person, to kind of carry out your wishes. And so that's kind of the basic document that gets submitted to the probate court, have to go through the probate process. And I can talk about, a little bit about that. Some people fear that process. Some people think it's not so bad, but I can kind of give you a little bit more information about that. But the will is just a basic document of who's going to handle your estate and then how you're going to have it divided. It's kind of the basic nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah, I think, for me, maybe this is a good time, just to kind of talk a little bit about probate, and maybe just thinking about like, if you don't have a will too, like what are some of those consequences of like, what probate process might look like?
Sure. Yeah. So, when you can do advanced planning, you put together a will, kind of setting forth how your estate's going to go. But if you don't do any planning, so say you say, I'm going to, just let it ride and, not do any planning, there could have some unintended consequences. You're going to have to, resort back to the default statutory rules in terms of distributing your estate. And that may not be what you wanted. And so that can cause some angst and heartache because some things may have been said informally that weren't memorialized. And if we resort to the default rules, it may cause division, it may cause misunderstandings amongst the family. And so that's kind of one of the goals of creating any type of estate plan is to try to avoid those kind of train wrecks that you could kind of see and anticipate coming. And so, and the intestacy rules basically provide for if you don't have a will, it's going to go to your next of kin. So if you're married, it'll go to your surviving spouse. If you have children, if you don't have a surviving spouse, it could go to your children. If you don't have any one of those categories, then it'll start to go to further and further descendants, parents, siblings, might be even cousins.
Right.
And cousins you may not even talk to, ever or even years. And so those are sometimes, the situations where it really grieves my heart that, hey, this person didn't want their assets to go this way. A cousin gets a notice in the mail that, hey, your cousin passed away and you're entitled to a piece of their estate, and they're totally surprised, but everyone understands that maybe might not have been what that person wanted. So
Yeah,
it's always a, good idea to start a plan.
And
absolutely.
then with that, so even if it does end up going to, the people they desired, it's a longer process. It could be costly, right? If you don't have those documents, right?
Yeah, so that's good. I started out my career working in the probate court, so I kind of got to see the different processes, the different, if you have a will, if you don't have a will, and it does take time to get started. So that's kind of one of the, I guess, the downsides of going through the probate process. It takes some time to get to that point where you have to go before the court because one, you have to wait for a death certificate. So after someone passes away, you have to wait for a death certificate. That could take, varying amount of weeks. Sometimes it's quick, sometimes it's long. And then you have to go to an attorney to prepare the documents to go before the probate court. And then just to kind of get the ball rolling, you're looking at maybe you're 6 months down the line when things could have happened a little bit sooner if you decided to do, some of the alternatives that we can talk about later, like a trust or beneficiary designations and things of the like. So, so those are kind of the process in terms of the time. But it's also more expensive generally to go through the probate process. So that's kind of one of the things from a planning perspective when I talk with clients is, hey, you can consider these other alternatives. We want to try to avoid the whole probate process if we can, to the extent we can, whether we look at, beneficiary designations on your life insurance, retirement accounts, because not everybody needs a trust, to be honest.
Yeah.
But there are some proactive things we can do to plan. And so, talking with your financial advisors, like checking in on your beneficiary designations, those are always good to do periodically because things may change, right? You may help some kids out with education or buying a house. And so that might adjust how you want to divide your estate. So that may affect your beneficiary designations on, your varying accounts.
Yeah.
So those are kind of, generally the rule is to try to avoid the probate process. One, because it's costs more, and also it takes some time to kind of work towards the settlement of your entire estate.
The opinions and statements presented on this show are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations. Never make any investment or financial decisions based on information offered on this show without first consulting your financial, legal, or tax advisor. All economic and performance information mentioned on the show is historical in nature and is not indicative of any future results. All indices mentioned on this show are unmanaged and cannot be invested in directly. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. Lastly, all opinions expressed by Jason Cutitta and any guests on the show are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of or are endorsed by ToBA Financial. For Jason Cutitta, investment advisory services are offered through ToBA Financial LLC, a registered investment advisor offering advisory services in the state of Hawaii and in other jurisdictions where exempt from registration.